It was a chilly autumn morning when Richard Carrington stood by the vast window of his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline. Skyscrapers rose like silver needles into the misty clouds. He owned half of them. Billionaire, mogul, media tycoon. There wasn't a corner of the city that didn't feel his influence. Yet none of his power could solve the problem eating at him daily. His daughter, Alina. Alina Carrington, just turned 23, had grown up in luxury most people could only dream of. Private tutors, exotic vacations, and a trust fund that made even CEOs jealous. But privilege had spoiled her. She spoke to staff like they were insects, thought of money as endless, and had never worked a real job in her life. Yesterday had been the final straw. Richard's assistant had shown him a video that had gone viral online. Alina, wearing a designer coat worth more than most people's annual salary, had berated a cafe worker for getting her coffee order wrong. She had called the poor girl trash and thrown the drink on the floor. Richard's temples still throbbed from the memory. His late wife, Sophie, had always begged him to keep Alina grounded, to make sure their daughter grew up kind despite their wealth. He had failed Sophie, but now he was going to fix it, no matter the cost. "James," Richard called out. His loyal head of security entered silently. "Yes, sir?" "Make the arrangements. As of tomorrow, Alina and I will disappear from this world." Richard turned, a rare, serious fire in his eyes. "We're going to live poor, no credit cards, no penthouse, no staff." James frowned. "Sir, with respect, are you certain the board, your business? My business can survive without me for a month, but my daughter's soul may not survive another year." By evening, every plan was in motion. Richard had purchased a modest two-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood under a false name. Furniture was simple, no marble floors. No grand chandeliers, no silk sheets. That night he called Alina into his study. "Dad, what's so urgent?" she asked, clutching her gold-plated phone. Richard took a deep breath. "We're leaving this life for a while." "What do you mean leaving?" She laughed. "Like a vacation?" "No, like starting over. No money, no status, just you and me." Alina's face twisted in confusion and anger. "You're kidding. Dad, I have brunch with Sasha tomorrow and the gala next week. Plus, who's going to water my bonsai collection? I just imported one from Japan. I'm not kidding." Richard interrupted firmly. "We leave tomorrow at dawn." Alina stormed out, slamming the door. "You've lost your mind." But by morning, after hours of useless pleading and threats, she had no choice but to follow. As the limousine dropped them off outside the drab apartment complex, Alina looked around in horror. Graffiti covered the walls, trash bins overflowed. Strangers eyed them with suspicion. "This has to be illegal," Alina muttered. Richard handed her a backpack. "From now on, we carry our own bags." Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of old wood and detergent. The heater clanked like it was on life support. Alina touched the rough walls as if they might infect her. "I can't live here," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "You will," Richard said softly, "because you need to understand what real life is like. Not everyone has the privilege to snap their fingers and make problems disappear." That night, Alina lay awake, shivering under a thin blanket. Outside, sirens wailed, and someone was arguing loudly in the street. She had no idea that her real education had just begun. The morning light crept in through thin curtains, casting pale stripes across the worn wooden floor. Alina awoke feeling disoriented. For a moment she expected to hear the hum of the central heating in the penthouse, the quiet shuffle of maids preparing her breakfast. Instead, she heard only the occasional drip from a leaky faucet and the muted sounds of traffic. Outside, her stomach growled. Richard was already up, sitting at the tiny kitchen table. He wore a plain grey hoodie and jeans, clothes Alina had never seen him wear. On the table sat a loaf of cheap bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 chipped mugs of instant coffee. "This is breakfast?" Alina said, wrinkling her nose. "It's what most people can afford," Richard replied. "Go ahead, eat." She reluctantly took a slice of bread and spread the peanut butter on it with the back of a spoon. It tasted bland and slightly stale. After a lifetime of gourmet meals, this was a shock to her senses. Once they finished, Richard handed her a folded piece of paper. Your job assignment. My what? Alina's eyes widened. You're going to work at the local diner, dishwasher. It's the only position available right now. Alina almost dropped the paper. No, absolutely not. You want food, you want a roof over your head, you'll work for it, just like everyone else here. I don't have to do anything, she snapped. Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. If you walk away from this, Alina, you walk away from me, and when this is over, there'll be no trust fund waiting for you. No penthouse, no Carrington name to hide behind. You'll be on your own. Her throat tightened. She had never seen him like this before. He wasn't bluffing. By noon, dressed in borrowed jeans and an oversized t-shirt, Alina found herself behind the diner's grimy kitchen. The smell of grease and detergent filled the air. The manager, a stocky woman named Carol, handed her a plastic apron and pointed to a mountain of dirty plates. Get to it. No slacking. The work was endless. Plates, cups, greasy pans. One after another. Alina's manicured hands, once used only to clutch champagne flutes and designer bags, now scrubbed and scraped against stubborn food stains. Hours later, her back ached, and her fingers were raw. She felt the eyes of the other employees on her. Some pitied her, some seemed to resent her. During her short break, she slumped onto a bench outside the diner. Sweat clung to her neck, so a young waitress, maybe a few years older than Alina, came over and offered her a bottle of water. Tough first day, huh? Alina nodded. You have no idea. I'm Jenna, the girl smiled. Don't worry. Everyone hates their first week. You'll get used to it. Alina wanted to scoff at the idea of getting used to this, but something stopped her. Jenna's smile was genuine, kind. She didn't look down on Alina or mock her. Thanks, Alina mumbled. Back at the apartment that evening, Alina collapsed onto the lumpy couch. Her whole body throbbed. Richard was watching the news on a small, fuzzy TV. I can't do this, Dad, she whispered. Yes, you can. And you will. Tears welled up in her eyes. Why are you doing this to me? Because the world won't always give you what you want. One day I won't be here to catch you when you fall. You need to learn to stand on your own. Alina looked away, ashamed of the anger she had felt earlier. For the first time, a small part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, her father was right. The days blurred into one another. Morning shifts at the diner, evenings spent dragging. Herself back to the apartment, Alina's arms were sore. Her nails, once painted in shimmering gold and rose hues, were chipped and cracked. Her skin, usually flawless, bore small burns and cuts from kitchen accidents. But something strange had started to happen. The people at the diner, Jenna, Carol, and even grumpy old Frank the cook, treated her like one of their own. They didn't care who she used to be. They cared that she showed up, worked hard, and didn't act like she was better than them. And Alina was starting to change. On her fourth night, she and Jenna shared fries behind the diner after closing time. The alley was damp and smelled faintly of fried oil and rain. But for once, Alina didn't care. So what's your story? Jenna asked, popping a fry into her mouth. You don't exactly scream working class. Alina hesitated. She couldn't tell Jenna the truth, that she was the daughter of a billionaire playing poor for high. A lesson. I made some bad choices, she said quietly. Trying to fix things now. Jenna nodded. Been there. My dad bailed when I was little. Mum worked 2 jobs. I used to think life was out to get me, but you play the hand you're dealt, right? Alina smiled for the first time in days. Right. Meanwhile, Richard watched all this unfold quietly. He would walk by the diner sometimes, standing, across the street, unnoticed in his plain clothes. He watched his daughter loading trays, wiping tables, laughing with co-workers. Not like the spoiled heiress she once was, but like a young woman learning what resilience looked like. One night, however, things took a dark turn. Alina was closing the diner with Jenna when a loud bang echoed from the front. A man burst through the door, face covered with a scarf, eyes wild. "Money, now!" he shouted, waving a small pistol. Jenna froze. Carol screamed from the kitchen. Alina's heart raced. She had never seen a real gun before. The man pointed the weapon at Jenna. "Empty the register!" Alina stepped forward, trembling but defiant. "Please, don't hurt." Anyone, just take the money. Jenna whispered. What are you doing? I'm not letting anyone get hurt because of a few dollars. With shaky hands, Alina moved to the register. She pulled out the cash, barely a few $100s, and handed it over. The man snatched the money, eyes darting nervously. As he turned to run, his scarf slipped slightly. For a second, Alina saw his face. He couldn't have been older than 19. He looked more desperate than dangerous. Seconds later, he bolted out into the night. The police arrived too late. Statements were taken. No one was seriously hurt. But the event shook Alina to her core. At the apartment later, she broke down. Dad, I was so scared. I thought I was going to die. Richard pulled her into a rare embrace. You were brave. I didn't feel brave. Bravery isn't about feeling fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified. Alina clung to him. For the first time in her life, she understood that money couldn't protect you from the real dangers of the world. Courage, empathy, and quick thinking mattered far more. And deep down, Richard knew his plan was working. His daughter was finally becoming the woman her mother had always hoped for. The next morning, the city felt colder. The sky hung low with heavy grey clouds. At the diner, everyone was still shaken by the robbery, but there was also a quiet respect in the way they looked at Alina now. Even Frank the cook gave her a small nod when she walked in. Didn't think. You had it in you, rich girl, he muttered. Alina gave a weak smile. Neither did I. Work continued, though the tension lingered. Jenna tried to keep things light, cracking jokes and teasing Alina about her terrible coffee-making skills. But Alina could see the worry in her friend's eyes. The robbery had been a harsh reminder of the risks they all lived with. Risks Alina had never known in her sheltered world. One afternoon, while scrubbing the kitchen floor, Alina overheard Carol talking to another waitress about rent increases and how the owner might shut the place down soon. If that happens, Carol sighed, I don't know where we'll go. Jobs like this don't just fall out of the sky. Alina felt a pang of guilt. For her, jobs and opportunities had always been easy. For the people around her now, they were fragile lifelines. That evening, back at the apartment, she sat across from Richard. Dad, the diner's in trouble. If it closes, these people, my friends, they'll be out of work. They can't just start over like we can. Richard nodded thoughtfully but said nothing. Can't we help them? I mean, can you help them? Alina's eyes searched his face. I could, easily. But should I? Alina frowned. Of course. You have the money. You could buy the whole building and make sure no one ever loses their job again. But if I swoop in and solve everything, you won't learn the most important lesson. What lesson is that? That not all problems can be fixed with a checkbook. Sometimes they require sacrifice, effort, and community. Alina sank back, frustrated. So what, we just let them suffer? No, you find a way to help without using my wealth. That night, Alina barely slept. Her mind spun with ideas. She thought about fundraising events she'd seen rich socialites host. She thought about the little community board at the diner where people posted ads and announcements. She even thought about Jenna's stories of locals struggling to find work. By morning, an idea had started to form. At the diner during her break, she gathered her co-workers. Listen, I know things look bad, but what if we hold a community fundraiser? A block party, food, music, games. We could raise money and show the landlord this place matters. Carol looked skeptical. That's a lot of work. And who's going to pay for permits, supplies, the music? I'll organize it. We'll keep it simple. We'll ask local musicians to volunteer. I'll bake cupcakes or, at least try. She smiled sheepishly. Jenna laughed. I'll bake them. You'd poison us. Frank grunted. I know. Hire a guy who can get us tables and chairs cheap. To Alina's surprise, the others nodded and chimed in with ideas. For the first time, she wasn't just the rich girl slumming it. She was part of a team. Over the next week, Alina worked harder than she ever had in her life. She visited local businesses to ask for sponsorships. She designed flyers and helped paste them around the neighborhood. She even stood on street corners handing them out. swallowing her pride as some people ignored or brushed past her. Slowly, the block party took shape. On the day of the event, the street was lined with colorful banners and food stalls. Local bands played cheerful music. Kids ran around with painted faces. Neighbors who barely spoke before now mingled and laughed. The turnout was bigger than anyone had expected. By evening, the donation jars were overflowing. Carol hugged Alina tightly. "You saved us." Alina shook her head, tears in her eyes. "We saved us." Across the street, Richard watched silently. He wasn't smiling in the smug way billionaires often did when their plans succeeded. His smile was softer, full of pride and a little sadness. His daughter had finally learned the lesson he had hoped for, but he also knew soon he would have to tell her the truth. The sun had long set, and the last of the block party guests were heading home. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the night breeze, casting soft golden light across the street. Alina helped Jenna gather the empty tables and chairs, her muscles aching but her spirits soaring. For once, her exhaustion wasn't from resentment or frustration. It was from doing something meaningful. Richard waited for her near the diner's entrance. "You did well today," he said quietly. Alina wiped her brow with the back of her hand. "We did well, everyone pitched in." Richard nodded. "That's how real communities work. It's not about who has the deepest pockets. It's about who's willing to stand together." Alina smiled, but the weight of everything they had experienced hung between them. She could sense her father had more to say. "Dad, what's next? Do we go back now?" Richard hesitated. "Not yet. There's still one more thing you need to understand." Alina frowned. "What's that?" But he didn't answer, not directly. That night, as she settled into the lumpy couch, she thought about everything she had learned. She thought about how she had judged people like Jenna and Carol before ever knowing them, how she had taken comfort, safety, and opportunity for granted, how she had assumed money made everything easier, when in reality, it often blinded you to what really mattered. The next morning, Richard woke her early. "Dress warm, we're taking a walk." They strolled through the neighborhood as the city slowly came to life. Shops rolled up their metal grates. Street vendors set out fresh fruit and coffee. Children with backpacks hurried toward the school down the block. Finally, they stopped in front of a rundown shelter. "This," Richard said, "is where I spent 6 months when I was your age." Alina's eyes widened. "What? You never told me that." "I was 17 when my father died. He left nothing behind but debt. My mother worked herself sick trying to keep us afloat. When she passed, I had nowhere to go. Slept on benches, lined up here for meals." He gestured to the faded sign above the shelter door. "This place gave me my first job washing dishes. Just like you." Alina swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's why I built the Carrington Empire. I swore I'd never be powerless again. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that power doesn't just mean money, it means responsibility." His eyes softened. "And now, it's time you understand that too." They entered the shelter. Inside, volunteers bustled about, serving breakfast to the homeless. The smell of oatmeal and weak coffee filled the air. Some faces were young, too young. Others were elderly, with haunted eyes that had seen more hardship than anyone should endure. Richard introduced Alina to Maria, the shelter's coordinator. "She's looking for help," he told Maria. "I think my daughter is ready." Without hesitation, Alina nodded. "What can I do?" For the next week, she worked in the shelter every morning before her diner shifts. She served food, handed out blankets, and listened to stories that broke her heart. One woman, no older than Alina herself, was pregnant and living in her car. An elderly man had once been an engineer before addiction stole everything from him. Alina cried more than once, but she never stopped showing up. By the end of the week, she felt a deeper change than she'd thought possible. The arrogance, the entitlement, it had burned away, replaced by empathy and purpose. One evening after her shift at the shelter, she found Richard waiting outside. "Dad, thank you for everything. I can't believe how blind I was." He smiled, a mixture of pride and relief in his eyes. "You're ready." "Ready?" "For what?" "For the truth." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. Alina opened it, her breath catching in her throat. It was the deed to the diner building, signed, sealed. "You bought it," she whispered. "I did. Weeks ago. Before we even moved here. I wanted to see if you could save it without my help. And you did." Alina covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But now it's yours," Richard continued. "I'm signing it over to you." She shook her head in disbelief. I can't accept that. You must, because from this moment forward, you'll be responsible for more than yourself. You'll protect the people who stood by you when you had nothing." Alina hugged him tightly. "I won't let you down. I know you won't." And for the first time in a long, long while, Richard felt peace. Word spread quickly. By the next morning, the entire diner staff and half the neighborhood knew that Alina Carrington, once the spoiled heiress, was now the official owner of the diner and the building it stood in. But they didn't know the full story. As far as they were concerned, Richard had simply decided to invest in the business. No one guessed that the entire neighborhood experiment had been a carefully orchestrated plan to save his daughter's heart and soul. Alina didn't care about clearing the air. Let them believe what they wanted. She had bigger concerns now. Carol pulled her aside in the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. "So, boss lady, what's next?" Alina shook her head, still overwhelmed. "First thing, no one calls me boss lady. We're in this together." Frank grunted his approval from the stove. Even Jenna smiled, though her eyes glistened with emotion. Owning the building meant stability, but it also meant responsibility. Alina quickly learned that running a business wasn't about fancy launch parties and Instagrammable decor. It was about payroll, repairs, negotiations with suppliers, and late nights crunching numbers. That first week, a pipe burst in the bathroom. The repair bill nearly made her faint. Jenna whispered, "Welcome to the real world." But Alina didn't panic. She rolled up her sleeves, got a good plumber at a reasonable price, and even negotiated a small discount. She surprised herself with how natural it felt to solve problems head-on instead of running to her father for rescue. She also noticed something else. Her staff worked harder and smiled more, not because they feared her, but because they trusted her. They had seen her scrub dishes and mop floors. They knew she was one of them. One afternoon, as Alina balanced receipts in the back office, Richard stepped in. He carried 2 coffees from a street vendor. "No fancy barista today," she teased, accepting a cup. "I figured you'd appreciate something stronger than foamed milk and cinnamon sprinkles." They sat quietly for a moment, sipping the bitter coffee. "You know," Alina said thoughtfully, "back when I had everything, I thought I was happy, but I never felt useful." Richard nodded. "That's because you weren't building anything real. You were consuming, not creating. Now, I get it." She looked at him seriously. "I used to think your success was about money and power, but it's about the people who rely on you, the lives you affect." He reached out, squeezing her hand. "Your mother would be proud." At that, Alina blinked fast to hold back tears, but life wasn't done testing her. Later that week, a sharply dressed man arrived at the diner. His name was Gregory Shaw, and he introduced himself as a regional developer. His company wanted to buy several blocks of the neighborhood, including the diner lot, for a luxury condo project. "I'm prepared to offer you triple the property's market value," he said smoothly, sliding a glossy contract across the table. Frank muttered, "Here we go." Alina studied the offer. The money was outrageous, enough to give every employee a year's salary and still have millions left over. Gregory smiled. "This is your chance to upgrade. Leave all this behind." She glanced around the diner, the cracked linoleum floors, the flickering light near the counter, the smell of coffee and grease and hard work. Jenna and Carol were wiping tables, chatting about weekend specials. Frank was teaching a new cook how to flip burgers without breaking them. All of it, the soul of the place, was priceless. Alina pushed the contract back. "No." Gregory's smile faded. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," she said, "but it's my mistake to make." He left in a huff, promising she'd regret her decision. But as Alina watched the lunch crowd filter in, families, workers, even the elderly man from the shelter, who now volunteered at the kitchen, she felt no regret at all. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was standing for something, building something, and no amount of money could buy that. The days that followed were tense. Gregory Shaw wasn't the kind of man to take no for an answer. Flyers appeared in mailboxes promising residents a better future if they sold their properties. Rumors spread that the developer was pushing city officials to rezone the area, which could make it harder for small businesses like the diner to survive. Jenna was the first to bring the news. "They're playing dirty, Alina, trying to scare people into selling," Carol added. Mrs. Levin next door already gave in. She couldn't handle the pressure. Alina felt the weight of the neighborhood resting on her shoulders. "We're not giving up. Not now." But doubt crept in late at night when she was alone. Richard noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the way she stared out the apartment window long after the streets had gone. "Quiet. You're facing a giant now," he said one evening. "I know. You could still sell. No one would blame you." Alina shook her head firmly. "That's not who I am anymore." Her father smiled faintly. "Good." The next morning, Alina gathered the diner staff and local shop owners. She stood at the same spot where, weeks ago, she had first proposed the block party. "Gregory Shaw wants us to feel powerless," she began. "He thinks we'll break under pressure, but this neighborhood, our neighborhood, won't be bullied." Frank crossed his arms. "What do you suggest?" "We fight back the right way, legally, publicly. We'll start a Save Our Street campaign, petition City Hall, reach out to the media, social media, everything." Jenna grinned. "Now that's the rich girl I can get behind." The campaign took off faster than anyone expected. Alina tapped into skills she didn't even know she had. She organized rallies, set up a website, contacted reporters. She even filmed a heartfelt video explaining the situation, sharing her journey from entitled heiress to community advocate. The video went viral within days. News outlets picked up the story. "Billionaire's daughter defies corporate greed to save working-class neighborhood." Donations poured in. So did volunteers. The pressure shifted. Instead of the residents feeling cornered, it was Gregory Shaw and his investors who found themselves under public scrutiny. City officials, wary of backlash, began reconsidering the rezoning plans. One afternoon, Alina received a call from a well-known attorney who specialized in defending small businesses. "I'm offering my services pro bono," he said. "Your story has inspired a lot of people." Tears pricked her eyes. "Thank you, we need all the help we can get." Even Richard, who had stayed in the background until now, began using his quiet influence. He made calls to City Hall, not as the billionaire Carrington, but as a concerned father and resident. Still, the battle wasn't easy. Shaw's lawyers filed nuisance complaints against the diner. Health inspections were mysteriously scheduled back-to-back. Harassment tactics escalated. One night, the diner's windows were smashed. Alina stood in front of the broken glass the next morning, breathless with fury and fear. "I should have seen this coming," she muttered. Richard placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "The stronger you stand, the harder they'll push." "But this means you're winning." The community came together once again. Volunteers helped board up the windows and clean the mess. Frank even joked, "Guess it's time for those new windows we talked about." Alina smiled through the tears. "Yeah, and we'll make them stronger than ever." As the legal case advanced and media attention grew, Alina realized something profound. The fight wasn't just about a building or a diner, it was about dignity, about people who had been overlooked for too long finally having a voice. One evening, as she looked out over the bustling diner, full of customers, friends, and supporters, Alina finally felt what it meant to be a leader, not because of wealth, but because people trusted her, because she had earned it. The final hearing came faster than anyone expected. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Residents from the neighborhood, diner workers, shop owners, families, stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding handmade signs that read, Save our street, and we stand with Alina. At the front table sat Alina, Jenna, Carol, and the attorney who had taken their case pro bono. Richard sat quietly behind them, his face calm but proud. Gregory Shaw entered with his legal team, wearing a smirk like he'd already won. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, called the room to order. The case boiled down to one thing. Shaw's company had applied for a rezoning permit that would change the entire neighborhood from mixed use to commercial luxury, forcing small businesses and residents out. The city council had to decide whether to grant it. Alina's lawyer spoke first, presenting evidence of the community's historic value, the importance of local businesses, and the public outcry over the development plans. Then came the testimonies. Carol told the court how the diner had been in her family for 3 generations. Jenna spoke about how the neighborhood gave her a sense of purpose after years of struggling to make ends meet. Even Frank, who rarely said more than a few grunts, stood up and shared how the diner had given him not just a job but a family. Finally, Alina took the stand. She glanced at the crowd and then at her father. He gave her a small reassuring nod. "I was raised in a world where money could solve any problem," she began. "Or so I thought. But living here, working alongside these incredible people, has taught me that some things can't be bought. Community, trust, dignity. This isn't just about saving a building. It's about protecting the lives and dreams of people who deserve to be heard and respected." Her voice wavered slightly, but held strong. "If this development goes through, it won't just erase businesses. It'll erase everything that makes this neighborhood special." Shaw's lawyer tried to counter, calling the area economically stagnant and in need of modernization. But the crowd's reaction, mutters of disbelief and anger, made it clear where public opinion stood. After hours of arguments, the judge announced a recess. The wait felt endless. Alina sat between Jenna and Carol, holding their hands tightly. Richard stayed silent, but his eyes never left his daughter. Finally, the judge returned. "In reviewing the evidence and considering the overwhelming community support," she said, "I hereby deny the rezoning request. Furthermore, this court recognizes the significant public interest in preserving this neighborhood's integrity." A wave of gasps swept through the room, followed by thunderous applause. Alina's breath caught. Jenna burst into tears. Carol hugged them both so tightly they could barely breathe. Gregory Shaw stood frozen, his confident smirk gone. He gathered his papers stiffly and left without another word. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Alina gently declined interviews. This victory wasn't about headlines. Back at the diner that evening, the celebration began. The place was packed beyond capacity. Neighbors brought food, musicians played guitars in the corner, and the air buzzed with relief and joy. Alina stood by the counter, watching the scene with a full heart. Richard approached, handing her a root beer. "No champagne today?" She laughed. "Root beer feels more fitting." He raised his bottle in a toast. "To the woman who proved she didn't need money to change the world." They clinked bottles. As the night wore on, Alina noticed something else, the sense of belonging. Not because people respected her family name, but because they respected her. She had earned it, every bit of it. And as she looked around at the faces of her new family, the family she had built, not inherited, she knew one thing for certain. She would never forget where she came from again, and she would never let this community be threatened, not while she had breath in her body. The lesson her father had hoped for was now part of who she was forever.